day of International Lecture Series on Language and Literature 2020. Learning is a passion, and it is our passion that helps us to develop ourselves. Even during this pandemic, we have chosen this virtual platform to continue our quest for gaining knowledge, and it is our thirst for learning that has brought us together here. I am Professor Ria Barui, Assistant Professor of English, Department of Basic Science and Humanities, Institute of Engineering and Management, IIM Kolkata. On behalf of the full organizing committee, would like to thank all the esteemed guests, distinguished speakers, students, colleagues, and my dear friends for joining us today. We take great pleasure to have with us today Mr. Scott Granville and Dr. Lisa Hopkins in our third and fourth sessions, respectively, who would enlighten us with new insights. So let me first introduce Mr. Scott Granville. Mr. Scott Granville is the director and co-founder Chasing Time English, New Zealand. Mr. Scott has worked in the education and media sectors for over 15 years in New Zealand, South Korea, Australia, and the United States. While his more recent focus has been on creating and producing original language education content for multimedia platforms, he has extensive experience and postgraduate qualifications in English language and literature, research and mentoring, as well as in-depth knowledge of cross-departmental and cross-industry collaboration processes in the educational sector. Mr. Scott is an experienced lecturer, teacher, and coach, and with more than a decade of leading complex creative projects, he possesses strong leadership and organizational skills and enjoys being challenged in collaborative and education-based working environments. So now I would like to request Mr. Scott Granville to start his session. Over to you, Mr. Scott. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the wonderful introduction there. It's my great pleasure to see some familiar faces and say hello to some friends, and also to welcome all of the listeners or viewers here today. What I'm going to do now, I'm just going to share my screen and bring up the PowerPoint presentation, and we'll make sure that computers sound on. And let's start the slideshow. So hopefully you can see the screen, and once we get this going. Okay, so I hope that screen is clear for everyone there. I'd just like to look a little bit today at confidence and communication. And you may have heard the speaker there in the introduction. I've had a lot of experience and been very fortunate to work and travel to many countries. But what I want to look at and focus on today in relation to the lecture series is how we use narrative drama series to promote active learning opportunities in the classroom. Um, I think what we want to look at carefully here is looking at ways to improve our speaking skills and ways to feel confident when interacting in real life situations. So here's what we're going to look at today. We'll have a brief introduction. Then I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what Chasing Time English specifically does, because we focus really carefully on building confidence in speakers. Then we're going to look at how film and television can be used in the classroom. We're going to look at introducing performance elements into the classroom, and we'll look a little bit more about what performance means. But really, it is about being able to look within yourself and find ways to promote yourself. And I'm going to use 3 case studies. So you'll see Adrift, Fortune, and Days Crossing, which are case studies 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to draw on some examples there to really push forward these points that we're talking about. And then we'll review what we've discussed today. And finally, I look forward to your questions and answering those. So please, I encourage you to ask questions. Firstly, just a little bit more about myself. It was a very nice introduction there. But as mentioned, so I'm the managing director and co-founder of Chasing Time English. And I'm a producer, writer, and director for film and television for over 15 years now. I've been an English language and literature lecturer for over 15 years also. And one of the things that I really enjoy doing is I'm a big believer in children's literacy. So I'm an author for children's books, some illustrated books. And even with the children's books, I'm always looking for things like rhyming scheme and helping children to develop not only their reading skills, but also how they would speak the book aloud. So all of these things tie into what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so Chasing Time English, we have three sort of goals or three pillars that we look at. The first thing that we do at Chasing Time English is we create original drama series for English language learners. Now, what we do with these drama series is that we look at how language is presented both in a fictional world, in a dramatic sense, but how that language can then be utilized in real life in authentic situations. And when we look at some of these case studies a little bit later, you'll start to see some of the activities that that can promote this. The teaching materials, and this feeds back into that first point, the teaching materials are all created to encourage confidence and communication. And it doesn't really matter what line of work or what line of study you're in. A key to success is having A, confidence in yourself, and B, having the confidence to promote that message that you have inside. So the third pillar that we look at Chasing Time English is what we call learner motivation. And I'm really interested in what motivates an individual to study or pursue an academic goal. And so we tie all of these things into what we do at Chasing Time English. We have the drama series, then we have the materials to help students learn. And finally, what can we do to help learners be motivated to be successful? Okay, so let's look at this first main point here. Film and television as learning resources. So you'll see here it says motivating and enjoyable. Now, the great thing about incorporating film and television into learning is that most of us enjoy or we watch television or we watch movies as a leisure activity. So when we're able to bring those elements, those drama series, those films that we enjoy into the classroom or the learning environment, there's already a sense of enjoyment. There's a motivation there that's intrinsic in a way. So we're doing something that we already enjoy. And then if we really dig down into what can we use the film and television for? How can we actually learn from this? Well, from a teaching perspective, if we look at it from the varied language that's in use, and we can talk about individual words, the vocabulary, we can talk about the expressions that are presented, but we can also look at the grammatical structures and the sentence structures that make up dialogues or monologues or group conversations within dramatic narrative. And one of the reasons is if we look at grammar, for example, I mean, grammar's the building block for language, but for many students, it's demotivating when we use grammar without context. So if you can bring these grammar points into something like a film or television show, you're really promoting the way that language is built upon, but in a fun and engaging way. Another reason that film and television is really valuable as a learning resource is that visual context. Now, listening is a key skill, and that is regardless of what you're studying or what you're trying to do. But once you're able to provide visual context with the spoken word, you add an additional element, and this really can promote learning in a different way. So, what I want to think about here is how we can use this from a teaching perspective. So if we think about film and television, episodic or in scenes, the way that we can present this the visual element gives us a whole lot more opportunity to look at things like predicting or understanding elements in context. And then the final key reason that film and television is valuable as a learning resource is the variety and flexibility that it offers. And I really want to look at those two words on two different levels. So when we talk about variety, the first one that springs to mind, of course, variety in genre. So again, you can accommodate an audience or you can accommodate a group of learners dependent on what they may enjoy watching. So you may choose a drama narrative, you may choose a comedy narrative. There's non-fiction, there's things like documentaries, true life stories. So we have this kind of variety and flexibility in the genre. But on the other side of that, and again going back to the sort of pedagogical use of film and television, is when we start to think about how we can incorporate film and television across all of the main communicative learning skills of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And so, what we can do, we can really start to recycle these key points. So, you may have some preview questions that could be used as a small group discussion. Then you could do some watching or listening of a short scene. That could be followed by a reading text, where again, you're using text taken from the dramatic narrative, put into a reading text, and then you can check comprehension questions and these kinds of elements here. And then finally, you may create a writing task to review what's been talked about. So you can really incorporate all four of those key skills into film and television as learning resources. Uh, Now, the next thing that I really wanted to look at here, and this is probably the core issue that we want to look at today. And film and television are really powerful teaching and learning tools. But what we can do to add this additional level here to encourage confidence in the communication is through performance based tasks. Now, I think it's important that we look at this word performance before we go any further, because we can look at performance in the way that we achieve something, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about performance in the way that you act out. So we're looking at this from through the lens of a drama performance. It's really encouraging students to take on characters or different people. Now, the first reason why this can be a very positive element within a learning environment is that it builds confidence in speaking the target language. Now, I should probably point out that when we talk about performance, we always must make sure that the student understands the reasons why we're using this. So if you can step outside yourself and then you speak with confidence because you've been given the template from the dramatic narrative, then we can also bring in these elements such as pronunciation, intonation practice, and these kind of core speaking skills that again are stepping blocks such as building confidence through performance. Again, if we look at this from a very structural standpoint, we can also encourage the use of key vocabulary and expressions. So even though we're looking at a drama performance, and we'll see some of these in the case studies, we're also bringing in key elements of learning. And this one really ties back into how I introduced this point here. When we have active learning through performance, it allows for the temporary suspension of ego or self during performance. And I think this is an important point that we stop and think about this for a moment, because there's a very common perception that public speaking or speaking in front of others is something to be feared. And I do remember reading a while back, and it was a very interesting article about public speaking. And what this article actually said was that the fear of death was ranked number two by people and the fear of public speaking was ranked number 1. So when we start to put it into this kind of context, we can see the real fear that individuals have, and we start to say, why do people fear speaking in public so much? Now, probably one of the main reasons is this fear that you're going to make mistakes. So if you can take on the role of a character and suspend it being yourself, then you can bring in the pronunciation, the intonation practice, the vocabulary, and the expressions. You start to build confidence because you're saying to the student, or you are the student, this is not me. I'm presenting another character. And it releases or suspends the ego. And that's a really important point that we should think about as we go through the case studies here. Now, what we're going to do today, we're going to look at 3 case studies, and I hope we'll have time to get through them. Because what I want to show you is a step-by-step process of how we can start to bring this performance-based element into the language or literature classroom. Now, you'll see the picture or the poster here, and we're going to use this series, which is called Adrift. Now, Adrift is a 4-episode drama series, and it's for English language learners. And so what we have, I'm going to show you a scene very soon. You're going to see the main character, Will Carver, and he's handcuffed to a table, and he's being questioned by an unknown agent. So the first step of this process here, this case study that we're going to look at, and so you put yourself in the mind of the student here. So the full episode is about 5 minutes, but we're just going to watch one short scene and then we'll talk a little bit more. So we'll see if this is going to play for us.
I'll ask you again. What is your occupation?
Who do you work for?
Does that matter?
Maybe.
Why?
Well, I have to consider whether you already know the answer to the question.
And if I do?
Then maybe we're on the same side.
I didn't know there were sides.
You're not the one handcuffed to a chair.
Okay, so this was a short dramatic scene. Now, if you were using this in the classroom as a teacher or a student, you'd watch the full episode so you'd understand the background of the story. And so Adrift is a detective drama. And what we would do then is we would watch this short scene. Now, what we want to do is we want to understand the verbal and non-verbal elements that are part of any dialogue. And we know that, from studying, non-verbal communication makes up a large proportion of what we see in a dialogue or a communicative action. So it's important that we recognize the kinds of verbal and non-verbal elements that are used when we perform. So we think about this from the perception of the actor. And so these things that we can kind of look at here, if we think about the verbal, we think about things like the tone of voice, the speed of delivery, the volume. The next thing we think about are the non-verbal elements. So we have hand gestures like I'm doing here. It may be body position, eye contact, smiling, facial expressions, these kind of things. So we build an understanding of what verbal and non-verbal elements are used to drive narrative. Then after watching the scene, we would have a short analysis of the script. Now, what this part does here, it encourages students to look at the words and the expressions that are being used. So in terms of script analysis, there's probably about 12 to 14 exchanges in that dramatic sequence that we watched here. But by preparing beforehand with using the script, then we can look at it from a very structured standpoint, person A says this, person B or Will Carver says this, the agent says this. And then we can say to ourselves, okay, what did Will Carver use as nonverbal and verbal cues to make this really dramatic? He had this slight smile. His tone of voice was quite monotone to bring out the tension in the room. The agent leant forward a little bit. All of these things build drama, build suspense. Then you would work with a partner and you would perform the scene. So one person would take on the role of Will Carver and one person would take on the role of the agent. You've seen the script, you've watched the scene, you've identified those verbal and nonverbal cues that they have used as actors. And then you're put into a situation where you're not being yourself, but what you're doing is you're recycling what the actors have done. And if we think back to you remove yourself, you remove your ego from the situation and you enjoy the performance. Then in the final stage, you can create a role play activity from this. So, for example, you might take Will Carver as one of the role players in this activity, and then you create an outside character, and together with a partner, you construct a short script, just as we've seen there, about 60 seconds. And then you perform your role play. Now, depending on the confidence and the size of the class and the amount of time you have as a lecturer or teacher, as a student, you may have that opportunity to present this to your class. And this is where we really talk about encouraging learning environments. And it can't just be from the teacher. It also requires student buy-in. Because if everyone understands the benefits that they get from this in recreating this dramatic scene, there's a lot of underlying learning that goes on here. Now, the second case study that we're going to look at here is from a show called Fortune. Jimmy Fortune, who's pictured in the poster here, he is a detective and he's asked to help when an old friend's wife is kidnapped. Now, there's something very different about what we saw with the Adrift series, which was pure drama narrative, and what we're going to look at with Fortune here. And again, this goes back to the flexibility that we talked about when using film and television in active performance. In Adrift, the task really asks students to focus on how drama is used. But it's also important to recognize that in film and television, many of the interactions are not how they would play out in real life. So what we see with Fortune is two different setups. In the first instance, we're going to look at a short dramatic sequence between Jimmy Fortune and the friend that he's helping. And they go into a restaurant and order a drink. But the second thing we're going to look at is a comparison video to a real life situation. So first of all, let's watch the dramatic sequence.
Well, I'm the same as him. I owe some people a lot of money. Bad people. And Jenny doesn't deserve to be involved in any of this. Hey, is this a joke?
You asked for the same as Jimmy.
Yeah, but this tastes like soda water.
Okay, so let's put that into perspective. It's a very dramatic setup. And so we have an interaction between a customer and a server. And the language that they use there creates tension, but it's not the kind of way that we would want to present this as a learning point. So when we talk about pragmatics or social interactions, we're looking at the way that people interact in daily activities. Now, if you were looking from a pragmatic standpoint at what just happened there, you would never want to encourage a speaker to go into this situation and have this conversation this way. So let's look what we can do to compare and contrast. So this is a real life scenario.
Hi, I'll have a lemonade, thanks.
Sure. Ice?
Thanks. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I ordered a lemonade, but I think this is Coke.
Oh, sorry about that. I must have been distracted. I'll get you another one.
Cheers.
There you go. Sorry about that.
No problem. Thanks.
So what we find here in this case study is that the performance task is different, because what we're looking at here is a dramatic setup and here is a real life setup. So in the preparation task, we look at the language of a social interaction. So in this example, we're looking at a service encounter. And so when we look at the language of a social interaction, we're saying, what are the stages or what are the steps that we take when we have these kind of things? Now, when we're talking about social interactions, we're talking about, as is said here, there's a service encounter. It could be such things as telephone calls, requests, invitations, greetings and farewells. So when we present this as a case study, we say, here are two actors and what they would do. In the second situation, here are two people in a real life situation, and these are the stages that you can take to have a successful social interaction. So if we think back to the first case study, when we looked at Adrift, we talked about a role play that was drama focused and was taken from a fictional context. When we're talking about the role play in this scenario, what we're trying to do is encourage learners to take on the language that was used in the scenario, compare that to the fictional language, which is a little more abrupt. There's a little bit of rudeness to it. There's not the element of politeness that you would expect in a social interaction. And then have students take on those elements of a real life situation and build role plays around that. But in saying that, we're still coming back to that core function of performance, of putting together something with a partner or a small group that you then present to an audience. Now, the third case study that we're going to examine today is from a series called Days Crossing. Now, Days Crossing is a 4-episode drama. It's in the action set in a small New Zealand coastal town. And again, there's a point of difference from the first two. In Adrift, we had a very dramatic sequence with a man handcuffed to a table. In Fortune, we put them in a slightly more realistic setting in a restaurant environment. And then with Days Crossing, what we're really saying is that in a small town environment, people's interactions intersect on a daily basis. So what we're going to do, we're going to watch a short scene, and then we're going to talk about a performance task that also brings in some other elements that's a little bit more in common use in a modern life. So let's have a look quickly at this one. Okay, my PowerPoint seems to have frozen. Just try and exit out of that. I hope you can still hear me. I'm just having, I'm not sure.
Yes, sir. You can do one thing. You can stop share and share, then share the screen again.
Here we go. Okay. I'll just stop that one there. Thank you. Sorry for that technical. Except there, we'll just try and get back into this here. Doesn't seem to be liking that there. I'll try and. Are we still there? What's happened?
Mr. Scott Grenville is facing some technical glitch. He will be joining shortly. Stay tuned with us. Okay, sir. We'll come back.
Okay. I apologize for that. I'm not sure what happened there. We're still recording?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to everyone there. I'm not quite sure what happened with the system there. Let me get this back up and then we can continue. I think I'll go back to here and let's hope this opens. Seem to be having a problem with my there. Okay, so I may have to turn the PowerPoint off if it's going to keep doing this, but we'll see. I think we'll skip past the video, it may be in there. So what we witnessed there was a very short scene, and actually there was no dialogue in this part of the scene. And so it was very different from A, the fortune scenario that we looked at, and then B, the adrift scenario that we looked at that had more interaction with words. So what we've done with the Days Crossing scene here, we've taken a character that we don't know a lot about, but we've taken a very visual example. He's on a windswept beach and he's clutching a letter in his hand. And what we read from this letter is that it's from a medical center. So what we're looking at here, we're asking ourselves, why would an individual be on a windswept beach with such a look in his eyes holding a medical letter to go and see a specialist? And it probably wasn't quite clear enough on the phone there, but his wife sent a text message saying, "Where are you?" So we know something's really happening here. So the way that we'd set up this, the way that we'd set up the performance in this area is that we would put students into a small group and we'd create discussion questions around this, asking, who is this man? Who was the woman that sent the text message? You know, what do you think is going to happen? So we start to use these kind of prediction questions. We start to preview what we're going to do in the performance. And then to incorporate technology, because technology is something that we use in our daily lives, is in this particular instance where the other two we were creating dialogues, for this one here, you're taking on the role of an individual. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with a vlog. So the common blog is text, but vlogs are becoming more and more popular. A video blog. And video blogs are a really useful way for people to share daily events, special occasions. People also vlog about a lot of different things. They might vlog about the way that they're feeling, all sorts of emotional elements, reasons why they're happy, reasons why they're scared, upset, these kind of things. So what we would do in this instance, we would give some examples, and so this we've used the gentleman on the beach, and the student would prepare a character. They would prepare a backstory for a particular character. And so if we use this one here as an example, we would answer questions to ourselves in written form, and we would say, why do I think this person is in this situation? How did he get there? What's going to happen next? And once we have written a backstory for the character, then you would take your mobile phone and you would actually create a vlog entry. So we bring back the performance element, but this time in the form of a monologue. But if we can convince ourselves, if we can convince the person as the character to take on a role, we can project this confidence and we can also prepare putting in those structures in place to make sure that we're confident delivering these kind of things. So we're going to spend a little bit of time summarizing, talking about what we've looked at. Before we do that, I'd just like to apologize for the kind of technical delay there, which was a little bit unfortunate in the timing. But if we think back to the start, film and television, they offer a wide range of activities for classroom use. Now, when we think about why film and television are really effective as activities for classroom use, we go back to that core learner motivation. If we can find something that we enjoy and bring that into a learning environment, we have a much higher chance for success. Anytime learner motivation is increased, it means that there is a higher chance of success in learning whatever we're doing. Film and television also offer those other platforms that we discussed. We can look at the language, the vocabulary, expressions, grammatical and sentence structure. Film and television offer visual context where we can introduce those linguistic elements in a fun and engaging way. And there's a lot of variety and flexibility because from a teaching perspective, even one small scene that interests the learners can present a multitude of different ways that we can then recycle receptive skills, productive skills, listening tasks, reading tasks, writing and speaking tasks are all available, as well as the fundamental skills of vocabulary increasing and grammatical skills. The performance-based tasks promote active learning. And when we talk about active learning, research shows that active learning gains much stronger or higher results than a passive learner. So once we take the film and television elements and we put them into a learning environment, and then we introduce performance-based tasks, we're engaging, we're actively participating in our learning. Because the great thing about language or literature is that they're alive. So when we can move away from the passive elements, so when we move away from input, all input, and find that balance between input and output, then we start to really promote the active side of learning. And this is what we really want to do, because if we're honest, why do we learn something is so we can use it. So if the knowledge only comes one way and then we can't reproduce what we've learned from that knowledge, we're missing half the transaction of what learning's really all about. It's important that we also recognize, and in that second example of Fortune, we looked at a fictional and a real life context. Because as strong as film and television and performance can be, it would be wrong to dismiss the reality that fictional interactions are not the way that we live our daily life. But as long as we make a clear separation in performance, so when we take a drama performance and we say, this is the fictional interaction that we're going to create, that's great. But in the knowledge that real life context also comes into play. So whether it's from a teaching perspective or even from a learning perspective, it's important that, again, we find balance. So performance should come from within. And through fictional interaction, we allow that removal of self. And so that should generate more confidence in the user. We only touched upon this very briefly, but technology is a part of daily life. And as we've seen over the last few months globally, the way that we deliver, in the perfect world, I'd be standing in front of you face to face delivering a talk like this. But that's just not possible in the world that we live in today. And we hope this changes. But what we can do is embrace what technology gives us. So in that third example, the day's crossing, we moved away from the dialogue between two people, and we said we can still perform a monologue, and we can incorporate the technology, which in this case was a vlog. Because certainly the younger generation than myself is much more competent and comfortable using technology. So when we bring those elements into our learning, we're also encouraging that confidence. So what I would like to do to finish up is really just a real overall general comment about what we've talked about today. And that is that performance can enhance learning. While it may not be for every individual, and it may not be for every classroom teaching experience, there's a really important place for the way that we're introduced to language or literature, any content. And there's a really important way that we can then produce it back. So I thank you all very much. Again, I apologize for the slight breakdown we had in technology, but I hope it didn't take away from the key messages that we got there. So I look forward to any questions that may have come up.
Thank you so much, Mr. Scott, for such a valuable session. It was very interesting and informational. There are so many comments in the chat box, so I'll just read out a few questions for you.
Great. I'll just stop.
Yeah.
Let me stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So it's a question by Ms. Rashmi Grover. What role would subtitles play in sharing such videos?
Wonderful question. That's a wonderful question. Now, I think subtitles play a really important part when used correctly. So it all comes back to what's the purpose, or what's the learning outcome that you're trying to do. So as a listening or watching task, alongside maybe vocabulary or grammar structures, I think subtitles can be used. But when we start to talk about the verbal and non-verbal elements, such as body language and those kind of things, subtitles can often become a distraction. So the way that I would do that, I would show the scene or episode twice. And in the first or second instance, let's say with the subtitles, the learning points that you are trying to make would be very different from the second time you used it without subtitles, where you would be looking more for the performance and the physical attributes and those kind of things. So yeah, I would always encourage subtitles, but to make sure that they're used correctly and have a very strong focus or clear focus for what they're used for.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. So another question we have for you is, what role does drama play in order to sketch the contemporary world? What role does drama play in order to sketch the contemporary world?
Is that to sketch the... Can you repeat the second half of the... I just want to make sure I answer this correctly. That sounds like a very fascinating question.
Sure. So the question is, what role does drama play in order to sketch the contemporary world?
Well, what a fantastic... Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Whoever asked that one there. Look, to me, particularly with the increase in social media, I mean, we all are on display in our daily lives through social media and these kind of things. So the way that we present ourselves, everything we do is some kind of presentation of what we interpret life to be like. Drama is just one phase or one element of that. So we can take any context or any event and add a dramatic twist to it to present a real life situation in a very different way. So yeah, to me, there's a very strong crossover or intersection between fiction and reality. And I think I know reality television uh, has become such a popular genre that sometimes the lines become so blurred. So drama, in essence, is a sketch of real life that's never ending. So if we can incorporate that into our classroom teaching, I think it's really valuable.
Thank you so much, sir, for answering. We have a lot of questions. In fact, I would like to read out this one from Ms. Pooja Rakecha. She asks that there are students from vernacular medium too. When subtitles are used, they cannot catch up and miss the gist of the scene. So how can we help them in such situations? Over to you, sir.
Another excellent question. We have to be really careful when we are using film and television to only use short chunks of visual text. Because when we do introduce subtitles, what we're doing is we're creating a path for students to see the language, but perhaps lose some of those visual contextual clues. So it's very important that you choose language level appropriate texts. It's very important to only use short chunks. And if you do have a number of students that are missing the kind of narrative because they're so focused and they've lost the path, then it may be important to actually prepare the scripted text for them to read before they even watch what they're going to see there. Because the last thing that you want to do if using film and television is to provide an extended chunk of visual text that you lose half your learners within the first 30 seconds because there's too much dialogue. So choosing appropriate level content is number one, and then make sure that you provide scaffolding for your students beforehand. It's a very common thing, particularly for lower level students. They can get lost very quickly. So yeah, short, sweet, and provide preparation text if needed would be the simple answer there.
Great, great. Thank you so much, sir, for such a beautiful solution that you have provided. Sir, there is another question by Deepthi Menon. What are the possibilities of multiple interpretations in a non-verbal scene? What are the possibilities of multiple interpretations in a non-verbal scene? Over to you, sir.
Strongly encourage that to be the case. And that's these questions are wonderful. The great thing about performance is that there's no one path that a single person should take. So when we're talking again about interpreting verbal and non-verbal cues, the way that three people look at the performance of one person, you would hope to get three very different interpretations. And what that does is encourage the performance to be very different. So just to follow on from that there, what you could do is give a short monologue piece to a group of students, and then independently, they come up with what they've interpreted, and then they would reproduce that scene. And what you'll find is the number of students, let's say 3, 5, 10 students, you're going to have 3, 5, 10 different interpretations. So that's a real key learning point. Nothing should be standardized by the teacher. There should be sort of no strict parameters put on how you interpret dramatic performance, because as soon as you put restrictions on a student, you're taking away that little bit of confidence that they're believing in what they're seeing. So you should always allow for that creativity to be the foundation of using drama in the classroom.
Well said, sir. Thank you so much. As I mentioned, there are a lot of questions, and everybody is applauding for a beautiful session that you have conducted. Another wonderful question by Ms. Rajani Shankar. A certain amount of English knowledge is presumed in the tasks shown. How can this method be used with learners who are beginners?
Excellent. It's a great point. Whoever the people asking these questions should be applauded because they are fantastic. So one of the things that I do with Chasing Time English and with my team at Chasing Time English is to acknowledge that we have different levels of language proficiency. So the 3 episodes scenes that we looked at today would be from the intermediate language level of proficiency, so from around a sort of B1 on the Common European Framework up to advanced, which Adrift is for C1, C2. So when you're dealing with beginner students, we recognize that the vocabulary and the language structures are not yet in place. So again, to go back to that earlier point, someone else had the question, it's using very short chunks of text and doing 2 things. Finding short video texts that have very sparse or very little dialogue or speaking in them. Secondly, providing those students at a lower level the support before they watch to be able to engage with the dramatic side of it. So you really have to strip away the kind of amount of content in terms of dialogue that's put into something like that. So for a beginner learner, there's some really excellent, almost silent videos, 1 to 2 minutes, that only have a handful of words, but you can still get the effect of performance because you can, even in the L1, you can explain what the verbal and non-verbal elements are, and they can still recreate a character just using those non-verbal features and a much reduced vocabulary range. So yeah, there's absolutely room for the beginner and lower level learners. But again, and as rightly pointed out in that question, it does need to be a text that's a visual text that's modified for that lower level.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, another question for you is, can script be used initially to encourage public speaking?
I may be a little bit biased because I believe 100% yes, it can. If we go back to that, I think it was maybe the 2nd or 3rd slide that I showed, and learner motivation is maybe the number 1 key issue in all of this. So if you're going to use script to encourage students to perform, the way that I would do that is to ask the students to find a short script from a show or something that they love, from a character that they've watched on television or something, someone that they know, that, you know, I want to be Batman, so I'm going to find a short script that Batman, and I'm going to become this character. So to motivate the students, absolutely bringing a script and asking the students to practice that script and then deliver it as a monologue, it's a really powerful and sort of positive way to bring students into that world. I've used that multiple times, and I'd encourage any teacher to use that in terms of performance in the classroom.
Thank you so much, sir, once again. Okay, so another question from Shumalya Mazumdar. The question is, why do you think the pre-Augustan drama has tempered the actual? Why do you think the pre-Augustan drama has tempered the actual?
That's a, yeah, I would be amiss if by pre-August, you know, if we're going, I'm just trying to remember my own dramatic periods here. But what I would say, what was the second half of that question? Was it, how is it tempered?
Yes, I'll just repeat. The question says, why do you think the pre-Augustan drama has tempered the actual?
Yeah, without, I don't think it's a question I can answer comprehensively, only because in thinking now, I would have to review the elements of that period. So I would hate to give a false answer there. So I apologize, because it's a really interesting question, but I wouldn't be providing a truly honest answer, because yeah, I'd want more time to think on that one. I'd be happy to answer that in written format if someone wanted to send that to me.
Sir, someone has asked about some of your favorite dramas that can be incorporated for teaching.
Great. Well, yeah, I mean, some of the more traditional dramas that have come, well, it's actually, sitcoms are really good. And the reason why I like sitcoms is because they try and present uh, that balance of real life. So the Friends, the American Friends series, which ran for years and years, there's actually quite a lot of work, and you can find a lot of really valuable activities on YouTube um, around how Friends was developed uh, into probably the most popular English language series that's used in teaching and performance. So I'd encourage um, teachers and even students to look at some of the content that's being created around the Friends show. Another one that's really good, and actually this reminds me of some things that I've used for lower level learners. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Mr. Bean series, the comedian Mr. Bean, but the reason that that's so useful for lower level learners in particular, it's a lot of physical comedy with only very few words. So the question that the individual asked a few questions back about lower level learners, I would encourage looking at Mr. Bean, the comedy. Uh, I've never had a class where students don't find it funny. So there's the comedic element, but at the same time, you can bring in their performance without that extra pressure of having an overload of vocabulary um, in there. So those would be two off the top of my head. Um, there's also some films are a little more difficult, because with films, it's just the length, and I always encourage people to use sort of 10-minute blocks at the most. But another really interesting drama film is one called The King's Speech, which was, I think it won an Academy Award a few years ago. But the great thing about that, it's a really dramatic story, but it actually talks about the King of England. I think it was King George or someone, and it talks about him overcoming a speech impediment. So there's actually a lot of learning that goes on throughout there, interwoven into the drama. So those three would be off the top of my head. And again, I'd be very happy to provide some additional um, suggestions. I can write through to you and provide a list if that would be of any use.
Thank you so much, sir, for answering all the questions that have been asked in the YouTube chat box. Thank you once again for being with us and being so nice to us, because you are there whenever we ask you for being there. So thank you, and we also look forward to having you in our conference in the month of December. So thank you so much, sir.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure to see everybody again. I can only apologize for the slight technical fault there, but I hope
Not
it
an
didn't
issue, sir. Not an
interrupt.
issue.
Yeah. I really enjoyed talking to everyone. I hope you can take some value away, and I'd be very happy to provide some written answers if there's anything further. And I encourage anyone to contact me. I'm always happy
Okay.
to help and talk. And yeah, thank you
Cheers,
very
sir.
much.
Cheers,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you so much,
Have
sir,
a
for
nice day,
joining
sir.
us.
Have a nice day.
Okay, lovely to
Bye.
see you
Bye-bye.
all. Okay, good evening.
Good
Okay, so we will be back in a while. Let Lisa Hopkins join, then we will be streaming her session as well. Stay tuned with all of us.